Virginia, I want to turn the call back over to you and John, and to see if there are any questions for me.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, there are questions. And John, while you start unmuting people, I think Jabari's going to be the first one. I want to ask you something first. You mentioned fear mongering, and I often hear about China, and that we're in such debt to China, as our friend Sarah Palin was saying. And but so-called liberals who say, I don't trust China. They're going to mess with they're going to devalue their currency. They're going to somehow screw us. What do you say to those people?
Yes, that's another scare tactic, and it's really not based on the facts. China only owns, I believe, about 1.2 trillion of our debt right now. But I think the important observation is that if China or any entity decided to, it wanted to, redeem its treasuries or whatever, because we have monetary sovereignty, you can just pay it. A debt for a government that has monetary sovereignty is not a debt the same way it is for a household. I had to explain this to members of our Congress who tend to view this the same way. Now, look, I want to be, clear. Look, I'm a pastor, I'm a lay person. There are people who are much more astute who can explain this issue. Stephanie Kelton, you all have had, Rowan Gray and others who know these issues and much more intelligibly than I can. But what I do know is this, that a debt for the federal government is not the same as a debt for Delman Coates. If I owe someone $1,000, I've got to go out and earn that $1,000. But the federal government, it's not the same for the federal government that creates the money. If anyone wants to redeem its treasuries, it just creates the money for it and writes the check for it, and the Fed has to cash that check. So this is a scare tactic that really doesn't work and make sense. And the whole notion of devaluing the currency as a result, I think it really is a legacy of the gold standard. We're not on this anymore. And it's just a scare tactic based on a lack of understanding about, I thank you, Rebecca, for putting that quote in the comments. She said that Warren Mosler and Stephanie Kelton say that the only thing the United States owes China is a bank statement. I mean, we write the checks, the Fed makes sure it gets cashed. And so it's really not an issue.
Great.
And we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Absolutely. Jabari, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks for taking time with us tonight, Delman. I never actually got a chance to speak with you before, so it's good to speak with you.
Bless you.
All right. So my question is a simple one, but not so simple. I'm a fellow African-American male who's also a Christian. What strategies can I use to get my fellow Christians more excited about economic justice?
Right. That's a great question. And the way that I get, Christians and people and African-American Christians of faith to understand the link between economic justice and our faith is to think about what happens the day before the week of Jesus's passion, where he goes into the temple precinct and he overturns the tables of the money changers. This story is very profound. It's oftentimes misunderstood. What's happening there in that story, Jabari, is that the temple priests have developed an alliance with the money changers for the creation of the temple shekel, which people coming into Jerusalem for Passover needed in order to worship. So if you came from Rome, if you came from Athens, you needed to convert your local coin into the temple shekel in order to purchase the lambs or the rams in order to worship. And what the money changers did was they took this very worthless coin and they ended up creating this coin and left people in more debt when they left worship than they came. And it was the unjust manipulation of money that Jesus, I want to contend, was deeply disturbed about. The issue there was not about there being a bookstore in the temple, that there was commerce going on. No, it was about the unjust manipulation of money, which I want to suggest is a part of the long-standing theological critique of usury in the major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam had a historic position that usury was sin. And usury was not just the charging of excessive interest. The definition of usury as excessive, the definition of usury is the charging of interest that's excessive, was a concession that Bentham convinced the Catholic Church to make in the 15th century, I believe, to give up its historic position that usury is sin. I don't want to get too deep in this point. The historic definition of usury was the unjust manipulation of money. This is what was happening the week of Jesus's passion. And it was as a result of overturning the tables of the money changers that led the leaders at the time to decide we need to kill this guy. So Jesus is a part of the prophetic Jewish tradition. He's one of the Jewish prophets who is about, bringing about a socially and economically just order. And it is foundationally to what, the witness of Christianity, I believe, is fundamentally about. And so that's what I do, is to really help people to understand the theology of economics that is foundational to the Christian witness.
Thank you. I think Rob has the next question. Rob, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Coates. How you doing? I just got a quick question for you. What's your opinion on reparations for African Americans? Are you in favor of them? If so, like what kind of reparations, like monetary, land, et cetera, do you think would be most effective in creating a more equitable and just society?
Right. Very good question. I support HR 40 and have been in conversation with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and her effort to continue to fight for reparations. I've also been in conversations with Dr. Ron Daniels, who's leading that commission around reparations. I want to say that I believe that the policies that we're producing, the reason we have called our policy agenda on our website, Rob, the Repair and Restore policy agenda, is really built around the fight for reparative economic justice. So the core policies that we are pushing forward, which are really about creating trillions of dollars on policies that would largely benefit people of African ancestry, people who are the American descendants of slaves. We think equal, if not exceed, the kinds of policies people might come up with for, I don't know, one-time check payments here or there. We're talking about creating trillions of dollars to provide guaranteed jobs that will provide childcare, healthcare for every American, federal funding of public education, pre-K through college, including for historically Black colleges and universities, Medicare for all. I believe that the path towards reparative economic justice comes from this repair and restore agenda. So yes, I support reparations as providing systemic and structural reparative economic remedies to the American descendants of slaves. And so I support reparations in a broader systemic structural sense.
Do you mix in MMT knowledge with your sermons? Seems like a good opportunity to meld the moral and humane teachings of Christianity, feed the poor and sick, with the real world economic blueprint to pay for it. Thanks for your time.
The answer is absolutely. I've done sermons about these core concepts that we've just talked about tonight. I've done sermons about the way in which I've done sermons. Dr. Michael Hudson is a part of our advisory council. I've done sermons about the legacy and history of debt and interest. And I've definitely done sermons about modern monetary theory. So I definitely integrate MMT and the Christian fight for social and economic justice. I sort of see myself as an heir of the Black church tradition. I believe that the Black church is a reference to that subset of African-American sacred spirituality that's been on the side of the fight for freedom, justice, and equality. And I believe that fight cannot be realized without an understanding of modern monetary theory. I think that's why we have some of the nation's leading African-American economists who are on our advisory council, Dr. William Sandy Darity of Duke University, and Dr. Derek Hamilton, both of whom have written on reparations, Rob, and are much more adept and astute in thinking through the reparations issue. I think both of them support the idea of reparations in the context of structural remedies, which might differ from others who think about reparations in the context of individual check payments. Economists like Nina Banks, who are on our advisory council. So yes, I do wed these two, John.
John, Rose's question seems a bit like a follow-up to this. So let's have her go first and then Sam.
Thank you. Good evening, Reverend Coates.
Good evening.
This is Roseanne from Boulder City.
Yes.
Have you found any particular phrases or catchwords that maybe light a fire under people, kind of spark, just get that little spark like, oh yeah, we got a check. It's insufficient funds. It bounces.
Right.
Those types of things that just sometimes, because we're always looking to bring in people who may not really have the time or to go into all the readings and the videos that we get to do. But you got them right there. And you have this, I know you're not sitting on no sidelines, you're right there with the real people.
Rose, I think you may have raised this with me before, and it's a very good question. I think we are always trying to find ways to crystallize these concepts in ways that are accessible to the people. It's one of my greatest challenges, when I'm talking to audiences, when I don't know the knowledge base of the given audience. And I would say that perhaps one of the greatest concepts that resonates with people is really the distinction between public money versus bank money. Because people know that they spend a large portion of their paycheck paying interest on borrowed money. Think about it. most of the person's monthly mortgage payment is interest, their car note interest, school loan interest, department store credit cards interest. I find that the people where I am understand the way, they know what it's like to have 50 or 60% of their weekly check paying interest payments. So for me, I find that what captures people is understanding the difference between money being created as an interest-bearing debt versus money creating without that obligation. And then they see that it is preferable to rely on money created without the debt, without this interest, perpetual interest obligation, versus money that requires that. And that it benefits, the financial sector to have us all relying on borrowed money. To me, this is something that people get in my context. And then I use that as a wedge to get, that's actually how we got started. Our campaign got started 3-4 years ago, really wrestling with, the financial crisis and how the financial sector was really creating this casino environment with its spooky money, with this, with this money system. And that's where we start. So people get that part. And so I would say the difference between public money versus bank money is better to rely on public money. Public money is our money. That's how we got the name of our campaign, the Our Money campaign. Public money is our money. Bank money is their money. Wouldn't it be better to rely on our money that we create ourselves, that we're not charging interest on, versus relying on the money from those guys? So that's what I would say.
Great. Yeah, we watched the launch of Our Money, and I remember you saying more public spending, more, whatever you said, more public spending, less private lending.
Right. You're right. We use things like that. More public spending. It's better to rely on money created through public spending than bank lending. Concepts like this. Lately, I'm starting to use more of the phrases of, we need to move from stimulus to stabilizers. Why should every 3 or 4 months, we have to have a discussion about whether we need $1.9 trillion stimulus, and another side says they'll just give us $600 billion. Well, if we approve this stimulus now, it's only going to last another 6 months, another 4 months, and then we'll be back at it again. It is preferable for us to move from stimulus thinking to stabilizers. Stimulus is temporary, stabilizers, automatic, permanent. It's better to look at that. And so this, Rose's question is very good. So this is the terminology that I'm using now: stimulus to stabilizers, bank money versus public money, bank lending versus public spending. So these are some of the things that we sort of.
Sam, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Pastor Coates.
Hi, Sam.
First, hey, Sam Kangaroo in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I really like the way that you frame these issues, talking about moving from stimulus stabilizers, for example. And I know you're someone, from having talked to Spencer at the last MMT conference, who believes in doing this brick by brick, block by block, county by county, state by state, nation. Grassroots movement, and you have to reach people where they are. And I know that tradition you come from, that you believe in that very deeply. My question has to do with strategy and tactics. The strategy is to implement these programs that I think everyone on this call supports. I see 2 ways to do that. One is through the electoral process. The other is through pressuring Congress, because they're the ones who hold the purse strings on all of this stuff that you're talking about. In order to get implemented, there has to be appropriations bills in Congress attached to new spending.
Right.
What are some of the tactics that you see can be used to pressure Congress, as well as help to bring about the electoral changes that would be necessary to pass these programs. In particular, I am curious to know what you think about a general strike, whether or not you support it, why or why not. Thank you.
Can you say more about a general strike?
Specifically, I'm curious to learn what it is you think of using a general strike as one of the tactics bring about the pressure necessary to get some of these programs implemented. I think that you and I and most people on this call probably agree that the current incarnation of Congress, especially left to their own devices, is not going to pass this stuff.
Right.
Not the Congress that we're talking about here, February 17th, 2021, as we're having this conversation. That's not going to happen. Yes, there's immense pressure. And we want this sooner rather than later, right? It's already too late in a certain sense. Any day that another day of suffering goes on is too late. So what can we do? Do you support a tactic like a general strike? Have you given that any thought?
I would support strikes, protests, marches, rallies, petitions, all of this. In the context that I tend to have a degree of influence, which tends to be with African-American faith leaders more broadly, and with civil rights leaders, I have found that we are at a very basic level of defining what to ask for. Because if you think about the range of groups and advocates that are out there that call themselves progressive, if you look at what they're asking for, they're either undefined priorities. So people, on the quote unquote agendas for many organizations, it'll just say things like, our agenda is public education. Our agenda is healthcare. Our agenda is jobs. And then you'll also find that many of their economic platforms tend to be focused on relying on more bank lending. Like it'll say, increase access to credit, increasing borrowing and bankability, right? So what I have found is a protest, which is a very important tactic, in the absence of having a clear vision of what to demand, is really not the place to begin. So for many, what we are doing right now is I'm focused on getting all of the leading Black religious denominations, as many of the Black civil rights organizations, to understand MMT and to understand the 3 policies that we've talked about tonight, and to formally adopt the repair and restore policy agenda as part of their organization's legislative platform. So Sam, right now, many of our groups are at a very they don't even understand a federal job guarantee. They think that if they hear Larry Summers say universal job availability, that's a good thing. Sounds good to me, right? Universal jobs availability. They don't realize that what he means is we want to create some jobs, just not too many jobs, right? We want to create jobs as long as it doesn't get below 4% unemployment. So we have a lot of work to do to really define the agenda. So what I'm really focused on, and I realize that there is a sense of urgency, and you're right. But right now we're all over the place. We don't really know what to ask for. Right now, many Black leaders ask politicians, what is your agenda for us? That's the worst position to be in. And so no other special interest group asks a politician, what is your agenda for us? And so I am literally, doing daily and weekly and every month, doing presentations for some of the leading African-American leaders and voices and journalists and talking heads and influencers and Black Lives Matter activists and and athletes and entertainers who want to use their platform to look for demand social justice, because we've got to begin to unify and develop and to begin to coalesce around a set of ideas. See, if we don't unify and coalesce around a set of ideas, then what those in power tend to do is just say, oh, we can write off Coates. He's just like one little fringe guy over here. We'll go to the other, voices, over there. So I'm really spending time, Sam, educating folks about, we've been asking for too little. We can demand more. And really building a team of African-American subject matter experts like Darity, Nina Banks, Derek Hamilton, and others who are saying, yes, we can demand, support for bigger. We need to demand something bigger. This is the thing about reparations. So I believe it was, wow, who asked me about reparations? I think it was Rob. Here's my concern about asking. See, if you ask for too little and you get it, then when it doesn't change your circumstances, you'll get blamed for things not turning around. So my concern about asking for something that's too little, and there's no amount of money, no amount of individual check that they could give me or you or that's like gonna do it. It's gotta be systemic and social and structural, right? So the problem with putting a number on what we're due and letting it be constrained by tax revenue as something that's affordable is that if you get it, and then there's still poverty and crime and disparities in healthcare, public education, and there's still issues of unemployment, then they'll say, well, man, we gave you guys, your reparations money, but there's still problems, right? So I believe we need the broadest, boldest set of demands to put forward. And we've got to articulate a vision, Sam, first for our community right now. And we just don't have that clear, concise. We have a fragmented fellowship on the left, and we've got to change that. We've got to bring together, we've got to create a multiracial coalition of people who are demanding a federal job guarantee, in my mind, who are demanding free universal health care, who are demanding federal funding of public education, pre-K through college, abolition of student loan debt. And once we have that coalition, right, I think that's what's so powerful about what Fred Hampton was doing when he brought together, Black folks in the inner cities with whites in Appalachia, right? That's where the power of his voice and vision was. And we've got to do that same thing. So for me, it's about articulating what the ask ought to be. We can't really get to the tactics yet because people aren't really clear about what the ask. People think that if they go to Bank of America and can get, I don't know, a few more percentage of their loans for Black folks, then that should be it, right? More access to credit from Wells Fargo. And so we've got to, and so I'm working right now to help get the issues framed in a way so that people understand that.
Access is such a sneaky word, isn't it? Access to healthcare, yeah, right. Access to money. Reverend Coates, I wanted to ask you about political reaction. I'm quite a bit older. I actually was at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom as a 14-year-old. But a lot of people don't know that Dr. King was really hounded about communism. And I had a professor in college who was Jack Odell with Freedom Ways magazine. I don't know if you know that name's quite a bit older than you, but he was a close advisor to Dr. King, but was forced out. Like the Kennedys basically said, you've got too many communists near you. So he was like a longshoreman organizer, Jack Odell was. And so he basically, Dr. King had to turn his back on certain people because they were, quote, communists, unquote. And I was wondering if you come across that kind of fear of socialism, fear of communism among the people you interact with.
I do get the question, is this socialism? Is this socialism? And it's really an unfortunate question because really people don't really know what they mean by socialism, and the person who's asking the question really doesn't know what they mean by socialism or communism in the first place. It's one of these dog whistles, as you know, that misinformed people use to stifle progress, to stifle discussion, to stifle debate. There's no greater recipient of public supports in America than corporate America. Corporate America is the greatest recipients of public welfare than any individual or group of people of color. And so this is about, and so I get that question, Virginia. I believe that was Virginia who asked that question. I think the biggest fear that in terms of fear though, is fear of banks among Black leaders. Now, I have been in sessions where I don't even talk much about banks. I don't even mention anything about banks, bank money. When I first started doing these presentations 3 years ago, I started in this trajectory sort of, more from a positive money perspective, sort of talking a lot about debt-based money. I talked a lot about banks. And, but in recent years, I don't talk much about banks largely. I've talked about it some tonight, but I really don't do this a lot. I talk about the power of the public purse. We need to harness the power of the public purse. And we've been misled about the capacity of the public purse to create money for the things that we so desperately need around healthcare, infrastructure, the environment, jobs. And we need to harness that power for these particular sets of policies. And people will say, well, if we don't do that, if we have the power of the public purse, then why don't we do it? And that would then lead us, and people will ask, well, who benefits from us not doing it? And ultimately the answer in my mind is the financial sector benefits from the conventional economic framework. The financial sector benefits when the federal government underutilizes the power of the public sector to create money for public priorities, because we then have to turn to bank credit. And so this is when in an interesting way, I hear people get really concerned. Even leaders, pastors, have said things like, man, Delman, we get what you're saying, but you're going to get us killed. Or people have said on a few occasions, guys, we're going to get killed if we go out here and follow, Delman. So there's this fear of banks, right? In an interesting way. So that's what I find is the greatest fear that's been articulated in my presence.
Oh, that just hit me like a punch in the stomach.
Yeah.
It is now 10:30 your time, and we don't want to exploit you. Is it okay to have one more question?
Absolutely, I'm here.
Thank you. Okay, Dan, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Good to have you, Reverend Coates.
Hi, Dan.
We were introduced by Fado last summer.
Yes.
A brief call. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate all your efforts, and basically wanted to get to. I think you covered most of it, but what you consider to be the lowest hanging fruit to target? That's going to be the trim tab, if you will, of turning the tide on things.
Yeah. I'm going to say it's the federal job guarantee. I think the low hanging fruit is helping people to understand that of time that there's a better way to do government spending, that stimulus is temporary. Stimulus is temporary, right? And we need to shift from thinking about temporary stimulus to thinking about automatic stabilizers. I find that when we did the stimulus last year in March and April, I received so many calls and text messages from faith leaders and civil rights leaders who said, oh, wow, the federal government I see it now. We can just create the money without having to tax Oprah Winfrey and Jay-Z and Beyonce. You just create the money, right? And I think over the last year, people have seen the way in which we have been held hostage to whether we can get Republicans on board with doing more stimulus. And I think in my mind, the opportunity is to try to drive home the point that stimulus is temporary. And what we need to do is to move from stimulus to stabilizers. And for us, that is to be found in a federal job guarantee. I believe that there's going to be resolutions out right soon and bills out. We're going to be pushing folks to start thinking about a federal job guarantee. And we need to start holding politicians accountable to a specific agenda. And this is why I think the repair and restore agenda that we've come up with is going to be so important for the denominations, the civil rights leaders and Black leadership that we work with, because right now we have nothing to hold anyone accountable to. I mean, yes, okay, we won the seats in Georgia. I'm close friends with Reverend Warnock. We both went to Morehouse. Okay, I mean, that's great. Made history. Stacey Abrams, a good friend of mine, definitely changed the landscape, by bringing Georgia through, right? But we've got to think about what have we established as a precondition for our vote beyond getting more people of color in certain positions. We've got to do more than that. We've got to make sure that we connect our voice, our votes to a vision for America that accommodates the people at the bottom and not just the top, 5% of elite Black folks who are able to get a few more corporate board seats and more Black coaches in professional athletics and a few more seats in government. We've got to demand policies that benefit the people. And for me, that's got to start with, the three policies that we put together that's centered around jobs, public education, and healthcare. So that's what I would say, Dan, a federal job guarantee and pointing out for people that we are right now held hostage by this stimulus thinking.
Oh, Steve Grumbine is here and wants to ask a question. He has his hand up. Steve.
Hey, Delman, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Hey, my friend.
Hey, the question for you is not so much on money, but more in terms of, this is a boring subject for most. Most people purposely avoided it in college. Right. Most people hate balancing their checkbook. Everything about money stinks except for when you have it. So people don't really want to talk about this stuff very often, even though it's the key to the kingdom, so to speak here.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, I've been trying now with RP for 6 years to make people interested. We've done so many things and, we try to put on events like this to give people a chance to hear from, voices such as yourself. I'm just curious, what are some of the ways in which you would do to get this message out there, to educate people? They got to be there. They got to show up.
Yeah.
They got to be ready to hear too. That whole idea of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear and so forth. But there's an attraction element here. I mean, we're competing with a lot of really silly alternative media that people lap up like it's manna from heaven, and it's just garbage. It's just a bunch of gossip and stuff. This stuff right here, this is like real. This is the real story. This is the, the nuts and bolts. How would you take something like this that people tend to avoid and try to attract them so that they can show up for things like this? Because it's been a real challenge, to be honest with you. And
Sure.
I want to see real change. I don't want to go off in a whimper. So I'm interested. What are your thoughts?
Well, the Our Money campaign, I imagine a lot like Real Progressives and other allied organizations, are organizations and campaigns that do not have deep pockets. The Our Money campaign is financed basically as an outgrowth of my church at my request as the senior pastor. We have 2 staff people, a program manager, Tamika Scales, who's on the line, and Spencer Veal, who is our policy director. So we don't have the resources to do a all-out grassroots community organizing strategy of change, as you think about like the industrial areas foundation model. We don't have the resources to do that model. And so a year and a half ago, Steve, we decided that our theory of change would be to influence the influencers. Okay. That we would identify people who have a platform and a base, and to try to socialize them around these core concepts and help them to understand how MMT was really critical and key to advancing the issues that they cared about. And then what they would then do is to use their platform and their resources to then sort of deliver, to really take it to the next level, right? So what I have done is to focus on I realized that I had limited energy as one person. I'm also a pastor of 10,000 people, that I didn't have the bandwidth to start local chapters all around the country. But that what I could do is to spend time meeting with the president and CEO of civil rights organization A, B, C, and D, and helping them to understand modern monetary theory. And then once they got it, to then get their board to vote on a policy that is MMT informed, and then to use that policy as a basis for their engagement with elected officials. Because elected officials, yes, I could spend time in doing sessions, Steve, with 100 members in my community. I could travel to Nashville, do a session there for 50 people. But the politicians, like right now, they're going to go to civil rights leader A, B, C, and D. They're going to go to Black denomination is seven of the leading Black denominational organizations that represent, 10 million Black people. So to influence the influencers, if I could get to the denominational leaders, and that's where we are now, right? I've got 2 denominations, major historic denominations. They're about to vote on a federal job guarantee. What do we have? Medicare for all and federal funding of public education, pre-K through college, as their policy framework for engagement with political parties and with candidates for public office. And I have 2 of the nation's leading civil rights organizations whose boards are about to vote on the same repair and restore policy agenda. So once we begin to influence the influencers, we also have talking to, I'm not, stating the names, but of key athletes and entertainers who have put together social justice organizations, even Black Lives Matter activists and organizations who are, trying to define their policy niche and ask. And once we can get, several groups, saying, similar things, the same things, we'll be in a better position collectively. If the DNC hears, wow, this denomination, that denomination, they're all asking for a job guarantee. And these three civil rights organizations and leaders are asking for the same. So our theory of change, Steve, is to influence the influencers. There are people with a platform, social media platform, who have access to those in power. If you can figure out how to get to them, I think that is key and transform. I'm where I am right now. I tell him this a lot. Yes, because I was doing this work, organizing, but I was more informed from more of a positive money or AMI perspective early on. And it was Spencer Veal calling me. I don't know, out of nowhere. I don't even know how Spencer learned about me, quite frankly. And Dan, if you know Spencer, I've got to ask Spencer one day, and I remember saying to Spencer, I said, Spencer, is this MMT? Are you trying to, get me into MMT? I never forget that, because I remember MMT was kind of poo-pooed in another meeting I was in. And he sort of camouflaged that, but, so it's really interesting to me that I'm, sitting here talking about, that our campaign is really so central, focused on MMT, and why I'm so deeply passionate about it. But to some degree, that's what Spencer did. He was just traveling around the country. I'm gonna ask him what in the world he was doing, and I ended up hiring the guy. I didn't know Spencer out of nowhere. Some guy from California, fresh out of college, and we had a lot of debates, Steve, and conversations. For a long period of time, Spencerville, but what did Spencer do? He influenced an influencer. So I have some modicum of connections and influence. We've got to figure out, in my opinion, that's the strategy for those of us who don't have the great resources, who don't have, the deep pockets as others. How do we get to people who've got a platform and to help them to understand this gospel? We've got to become evangelists. I regard myself as an MMT evangelist, to spread the good news of modern monetary theory, that
I love it.
the purse is not as small as we've been taught. So we've got to spread the good news, the gospel. That's what gospel is. It's good news. And so I would say, Steve, that the theory of change is, how do we influence the influencers? How do we get to the people with the platforms? How do we get to right now I'm thinking about, how do we create a journalist for MMT cohort and start training journalists, people who are like on television, right? Who keep allowing politicians to talk to them about the deficit in incorrect ways. How do we create a community of social media influencers for MMT, hip hop artists for MMT? So those people have tens of thousands, hundreds of millions of followers. And that's really what I'm working on right now, to influence the influencers. Sorry to ramble and go so.
No, this is perfect. I mean,
Someone mentioned Ice Cube. I did a 2-hour training with Ice Cube back in October. It was great. He gets it. It was after our 2-hour training that he started coming out and posted about Kelton's book and the deficit myth. We kind of came in late in the game after he had already done work around his contract, but he's really passionate about, improving America, getting the country right on track. And look, all of these voices out here, they may be saying different things, but, people know that the country is messed up right now. They just want to help our people and our community right now. And so we've got to figure out, Steve, how to use our limited resources to influence the influencers, so that when people get positions, I've got some people in my church I see on television pop up on, who've got some really great, opportunities and voices. We got to figure out how to get to the influencers and then let them deliver the mail. And we serve to help resource them. I take the repair and restore agenda, and tell organizations, put your logo on it, make it yours. Make it the National Baptist Convention repair and restore policy agenda. You don't have to do any work. And all of our economists, they're now at your disposal. And they're like, oh, great, and so that's to me the approach that I'm taking.
I think we're going to end up stealing your agenda.
Use it.
You got it, bud. Hey, listen, I want everybody to know Delman will be our guest on the Macro and Cheese podcast this Saturday. And we talked about a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff that you heard tonight, but there's some other really good nuggets. So I really hope you all take the time to listen to it, share it around widely, get it into an influencer's hands. Let's start using these tools that we have. These podcasts are not just entertainment. They're a weapon of war, and we are in a war. And so I want to thank General Delman Coates for leading the troops into battle. And I really appreciate the answer. So thank you very much, man. I big time thank you for your time too.
Sure, brother.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Coates. And thank you to everyone for coming. Again, we're at realprogressives.org. You can find our podcasts there, links to our social media pages. We have a great writers team. Jabari and I are the editors-in-chief of the writers. We have a video team. Anyone who wants to volunteer for us, you can sign up there on the website or contact us here. And thank you all for coming. Anyone who wants